Hey lady, welcome back to the ladies room, and today we are reviewing the book The Call of the Wild by Jack London. So who doesn't know about this book? I saw this book in the little library and I had to have it. Only 62 pages, and it just took me a couple of weeks to read. There are at least two or three movies and a limited series made off of this book. I saw the 1972 version and it was awesome. That there is a 1930s and a 2020 version also, but I decided that I would watch the 2020 version, but after I read the book. At this point, when I was writing the review and I was reading the book, I had not seen the 2020 movie yet. Disclaimer. So the book is actually from the perspective of the dog, which was cool. The book opens with Buck, who's a dog, a St. Bernard Shepherd mix. He lives with a judge, and his family own a little bit of land in California. The year is 1897, I believe, and he is living a good life. He's well fed, plenty of land to run around. He has two other canine companions that live with him. I think one of them is like a bulldog, and the other, I forget what the other dog is. Until one day, one of the workers, Miguel, needed some money, and he dog naps Buck, throws him in the back of the truck, and sells him to a handler for money. um, he tells the handler that Buck is prone to fits, so the handler sells him to a breaker, and they call this man the man in the red sweater, and it's his job to break the dogs. So he breaks Buck with the club, and that's where they get the law of club and fang. He learned the law of club and fang, so the dog obeys the master, and the master rules with the club, basically. Buck was sold to the mail company at the time. A French guy named Francois and his crew were getting a team of dogs together to deliver the mail to the Yukon and beyond, because what other way would they get mail there? Spitz was the lead dog. There were two huskies, Billy and Joe. They were brothers. There was a one-eyed husky named Solex. He doesn't care about anything but work. Dave and Buck were next to each other at the rear wheel, and three more huskies were added later for a total of 9. R.I.P. Curly, because Curly never made it. Curly was a real one. Like, Curly was stuck with Buck since he was out of the first container. So they reached Alaska. Buck had never seen snow before, so he had to learn how to toil under the snow and move as a team through the ice and all that other stuff. Brave the elements. He got better and better to the point where the team made record time, and they were just running the mail. Like, everyone loved them. They were basically like celebrities up there. All the dogs liked him except for Spitz, the main dog, because Buck was liked better by the other dogs. Like, everyone favored Buck, and he was mad about it. So he challenged him a few times, like nipped at him, tried to push him off course, stuff like that. And eventually Buck realized that he needed to take him out. So there was one night where they were attacked by a pack of feral huskies. I don't know exactly what the story with these huskies were, but it was a pack of huskies and they were out in the wild by themselves. They probably used to be a team and they were starving. So they attacked the other dogs. They attacked the camp. They stole their food. And instead of the dogs banding together like they were trying to do, Spitz took it as an opportunity to challenge Buck again. And Buck was ready. He was ready at this point, and he took him out. And, like Curly, once a dog goes down, the other dogs pile in, and that's food. So he was done. So after that, Buck became the lead dog, and everything was good until they received word that the male rat will be discontinued. The dogs were sold to an odd trio: a woman, her husband, and her brother. None of them knew anything about sled dogs or how to drive a sleigh or anything like that. They were just up there to get gold and get rich. So this was the first time that Buck had been uh, owned by someone who didn't know anything. So, and it was hard to communicate with them because he's a dog. So he was trying to show them like they're the team, they know what they're doing, but they were looking at them, and they were lazy. The people were lazy, so they were looking at the dogs like the dogs were lazy, and they were whipping them and abusing them because they couldn't pull the sled. The sled was so heavy, with all the woman's stuff on it. Like they had a whole tent on it that the sleigh could barely budge. Like the townspeople told them that this sleigh is not even gonna budge because it's iced in, and you have too much stuff on it for the dogs to pull. Did I mention that these dogs have went over 20,000 miles delivering this bale? Like amazing, like ridiculous. And this is like a terrain that is not easy to navigate, let alone pulling all of this cargo with you at the same time. So they were whipping them. The woman at one point threw herself on the ground and was like she wasn't gonna budge. So the whole thing was just a mess. Dogs had went over, I want to say the dogs went over 20,000. The dogs had run over 20,000 miles. So they were dog tired, literally. This is where John Thornton comes in. He sees them abusing the dogs and he steps in and he saves Buck. And literally, as soon as he bought Buck, they were watching them pull off into the distance, and the ice broke because the spring was coming in, things started to thaw, and they watched the whole sled and the rest of the dog crew fall through the ice. And there was nothing that anybody could do. So Buck felt like John saved his life. So he was super loyal to John, wouldn't leave his side, and they travel together. They made money together. They hunt. They explore. They're enjoying themselves, and they're looking for gold still, which they find. And everything is good. Everything is good. They're sifting through the gold. John is thinking about what he could cash in on his way back. You know what I mean? And this is around the time where Buck sees a timber wolf in the woods, and then eventually he meets this timber wolf in the woods, and the timber wolf, they become friends. And the timber wolf eventually wants Buck to go meet the family that's deep in the forest, and so they start to run, and he feels like this inside, like this uh, primal need to just be out there and be free. So he starts running, and then he quickly realizes that he left John behind, and he's supposed to be loyal to John, so he runs back. And by the time he gets back, he had found that John had been killed by some invaders, and a couple of them were still there. So he lunges, he's biting, he's scratching, he's tearing people's throats out, and he avenged John's death. And the book goes into how he actually felt about taking a human life, because you know the rule of Club and Fang is that you obey your master, and the book just goes into, like, you know, his thought process and how he really felt about breaking these laws that he had been following his whole life. I thought that that was the most captivating part of this book. But he still felt really bad on the inside about that. So he stayed with John's body for as long as he could. He stayed with John's body until he saw that same pack of timber wolves, which I didn't know if he knew it was the same pack at the time because he had never met them. But they had rolled down on him and challenged him, I guess, for all of the carcasses and the meat. So they challenge him, and you know, he's a Bernard Shepherd mix, so he's bigger than them, and he wins, and they ended up accepting him, and he meets up with his old friend, and you know, I guess he's a part of the pack now. And the book goes into the future and how, like, Buck created like a different breed of dog. Like now all of the dogs in that part of the Yukon all have a little bit of Saint Bernard Shepherd in them, and they puppies running around looking like Buck, etc. You know, the Call of the Wild or whatever. Overall, super entertaining. I love to see that the other dogs had personalities and like how they interacted with each other. And oh yeah, I watched the 2020 version, and I like the cinematics of it, and I like the way it was put together, but I don't know, I wasn't overjoyed by it, because I would have liked to see Buck less Saint Bernard and more Shepherd, like dangerous. We talking like fangs, like, you know. And also they kept it really PG. I was underwhelmed because they took out a lot of the parts that were pivotal to the book, because they might have been a little bit more gory. Oh, and they changed the story plot slightly to avoid the violence and kind of make a partial love story. Have you ever read The Call of the Wild by Jack London? I want to know. Leave it in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And I will see you in the next one. Bye. He was beaten. He knew that. But he was not broken. He saw, once for all, that he stood no chance against the men with the club. He learned the lesson, and in all his afterlife he never forgot it. That club was a revelation. It was an introduction to the reign of primitive law, and he met the introduction halfway.